Chapter 2. My name is Jeff Bilyeu. I'm the aviation director for Brazoria County. I'm the chair of the GA committee for the chapter. Gary Davis is our vice chair, and he's going to be introducing the program here momentarily. I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. We've got tons of topics that are of interest to the group, and having Dan and some perspective from NASAO is a great opportunity for us to hear issues and priorities from different perspectives. And so I think that's a great value for all of us. There'll be some time after Dan's presentation. So we'll chat about anything. If anybody has any thoughts or questions related to the program or anything else. I'm looking at the list. I don't see anybody in the chapter leadership at this point. If any of our officers pop in, I'll introduce them at the end. Give them just a second. But again, thanks everybody for being here. We really appreciate it. Gary, I'll turn the time over to you and let you introduce our speaker.
All right, thank you, Jeff. As Jeff said, I'm the vice chair. I'm aviation director down at San Patricio County, which most people don't know where that is, but it's just north of Corpus Christi. So our guest speaker today is Mr. Dan Harmon. He is the current position director of Texas Department of Aviation. He's served 22 years in the Navy as a P3 driver. He's been the Maritime Division Commander at TxDOT and the NASAO committee chair for block grant states, working with the FAA on that. We have Dan today with us. He's going to be representing NASAO, giving us their perspectives on general aviation. And we'll talk in how they commit with the other 3- and 4-letter agencies around the aviation world to speak to Congress with a single voice and single priority selections. So with that, Dan, we turn it over to you and thank you and welcome.
Well, thanks. I appreciate you having me here. It's kind of, whenever I'm introduced as a speaker, it makes me laugh a little bit that, actually somebody wants to hear me talk. So I, representing NASAO here today, not just kind of my role as TxDOT. Greg, I was just on the phone with Greg. He's at a conference right now, and Jessica Nagasaka, who normally handles the legislative affairs, she's I guess decided to get married, and being in the Navy, if I'm always in a perspective of if we wanted you to have a spouse to take up your time, we would have issued you one. But, I guess apparently it's a new day and age and people are allowed to do whatever they want. So she's off getting married and having a honeymoon and all that stuff. So you guys get me. Kind of to kick it off, my role in NASAO is I am the block grant committee chairman. I guess I pretty much was absent the day they took the vote. And so, the saying goes, you want something real bad, you get a real bad something, and that's me. But I have been working a lot with the legislative affair and NASAO leadership about, trying to help build NASAO's legislative agenda for reauthorization. And then, working with, especially with the legislative side, to, walk the halls in DC and talk to key legislators about reauthorization, and not just Texas and not just block grant priorities, but NASAO priorities for reauthorization. I see Tom's on the call here, and I know that Greg and Jessica reach out a lot with AOPA and NBAA a lot. We're very good partners with them, I hope. That's my impression. And so, trying to make sure that we are a common voice, and we may not have there may be some things that are important to one side of the family that may not be important to the other side, but, we want to make sure that we all agree on certainly what we're trying to do is make sure that we agree on the important things, and maybe even if we can't agree on all things, at least agree not to try to sink each other, if you know what I mean. When it comes to reauthorization, things that, NASAO is looking at across the board as far as industry-wide, not just, of course, I'm partial to block grants, but, is looking at AIP funding across the board, looking at increasing funding for airports, and, indexing the passenger facility charges, and then, looking at some of those things where we can get more funding, how can we get more funding out to the airports? How can we get, to project delivery? And, we want them to focus on getting money out for project delivery, getting out money to lay concrete, not, spend it on, what we consider to be, kind of administration stuff. There's a lot of other things that, that are important to us. Of course, safety is primary. And we know there's a lot of priorities out there, but, right now, as we go into reauthorization, as far as, every time you turn on the news, there's, delays, no TAM system going down, all of these big issues that are going to be looked, that the FAA is going to be looking at, and the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and then, Senate Commerce are going to be looking at. So hopefully we can raise that or keep the airports and airport funding in the visibility on that, so it doesn't get lost in a lot of the, the other competing priorities. One thing that we are, trying to support, this isn't a big thing necessarily where I'm in Texas, but it is in a lot of the other states for the essential air service. We want to see that continued. Certainly we want to make sure that airports, the whole system, when we talk about new entrants, whether it's UAS or AAM, from my perspective, when we look at new entrants, that's not replacing something, at least right now, it's just adding to. And so it means more facilities, it means more congestion in the airspace, it means more competition for resources, whether it's space on the ground, space in the air, space and bandwidth, as far as the electronic spectrum, all of those things, it's adding to, it's not replacing. And so we want to make sure that the FAA addresses those. It's, in a very, in a very logical manner. And being government, we all know that government kind of goes from one extreme to the other, and in reaction to whatever. So, what we want them to do is be consistent, and, not just say, okay, states, you now have the whole UAS problem, or, do what they're doing now and just kind of moving along at a snail's pace. There has to be some sort of happy medium there of getting this new technology out. And that's not just from the aviation, or from the UES, the AAM operators. That also goes to, looking at, the next generation of aircraft fuel. We can't just have states, certain states just making rules where they shut down. You can't have leaded gas anymore. That's going to cripple this community if a state, a single state unilaterally does something like that. So we have to, we want to make sure that this is done in a very, when we start changing fuels or add fuels to the system, it's done methodically, and that you're going to have an access to fuels, across the system during a transitional period. You can't just shut something off and expect the system not to be impacted. So all of those things, we're big, active participants with the EAGLE program and several other programs. That's not my area of specialty, but certainly we have been working with the FAA and with other program sponsors to work towards that end. And then I'm kind of looking at some of the things from on our our list here, PFAS isn't an issue that I deal with a lot, but there are a lot of airports that are having to deal with that, with the AFFF aqueous foam issue of cleanup, not having a suitable replacement right now, and what that's going to look like of having the FAA bear some responsibility. You required us to use this, and now you're saying we can't use it, or we have to clean everything up. There should not be an expectation that airports get penalized for doing what they were told to do. And so those are kind of where we are on the NASAO legislative priorities. I can say that from coordination with the FAA and other agencies, we are we do what we can. It's the NASAO staff is pretty small. It's only 3 people, and Greg and Jessica do most of the legwork when it actually comes to talking with FAA and talking with other groups in the DC area. But we try to supplement that where we can. Being the state directors, to try to take on some of that role. But again, it's we try to. Some of us are a little bit more fluent in some of the areas than others. So, like I said, I can't speak to PFAS a lot because it's not necessarily something that I deal with in my daily job very much anymore. But but other states, it's a huge problem. But as a organization, we're looking at that. Like I said, that and sustainable fuels and pretty much all those other things that are big topics for the industry right now. Trying to think what else I could tell you about kind of NASAO. With the one thing I will say about NASAO is from an airport side, and as a state director, I spend most of my time with block grant issues, and there and even within the block grants, there's 10 different states that operate 10 different ways. And, it's really interesting just to talk to my fellow directors on the block grant side of things that they do, and the practices that they use that are different from how we do it. But then, when we get together and talking with my colleagues and other, whether it's channeling states or pure, direct to the airport FAA states, seeing how they do business is very interesting to us, and we're always trying to find better ways of doing business and talking with our colleagues about how to. We want to create as standardized an atmosphere as we can, from as far as how stuff happens from a grant perspective and construction. They'll never be 100% the same, but we are looking for ways where we can work better together to try to standardize a lot of what happens. I mean, yes, we're not trying to change any, you're not going to see different markings in different states, but certainly the expectations as people, may work, move and work at different airports in different states, that things don't drastically change too much in the way that things are done. So with that, I guess I just open it up to questions that I can answer either from a NASAO perspective or from me. So please feel free to ask me pretty much anything, unless it involves hockey. I don't know a lot about hockey.
Hey, Dan, it's Gary. Hey, so from a NASAO standpoint on electrification, given and we'll just use Texas as a scenario from the grid, it's taken us, 150 years to get the infrastructure we have. And I don't believe we have enough windmills or hydro dams or solar so how does NASAO or as a state look at trying to electrify the airports, whether commercial service or just GA?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, we have been, from a NASAO perspective, one of the things that has been talked about, especially under, in the kind of that sustainable fuel discussion of alternate fuel, so to speak, has been, we've been trying to get the FAA to kind of tell us what you're, how are you thinking? What is your mindset on, when we start adding things to airports that will create, we already look at it and we know that there's going to be a substantial increase in requirements for utilities. There's also, from an administrative side, you are going to have to change the way that you look at, and the simplest thing, you're going to have to change the way that you look at how electricity is sold as a fuel, as far as airport revenue, or that at the basic level, let's just, but as far as adding infrastructure, this is going to become, you're going to have to get into the electric business whether you like it or not. And so we are, at the airport level, like this, again, like I was saying before, looking at this as not replacing something, but adding to. You can't just expect the current, and this is a conversation that we've been having, is you can't expect us with the current budgets that we have to support the infrastructure needed at all size airports to support a new generation of aircraft on top of everything else with the current budgets we have. And, not just the FAA, but, as you were saying, you have policies across the nation is trying to, nobody wants to kill the environment. Okay. But there's a certain amount of resiliency that is involved with using natural gas or other fossil fuels or nuclear power or things like that, because right now we do not have the capacity in renewables to sustain our current power needs, much less an additional power need that's generated by electric aircraft, electric vehicles. If you ban gas stoves, this need for electricity, it's got to come from somewhere, and renewables alone right now can't support that, much less in the middle of a winter storm or a hurricane. And so that's something that it's part of a larger discussion, I think, not just with FAA, but from a DOT perspective, with FHWA. FHWA is pushing lots of money and lots of attention towards, highway department such as TxDOT, putting in recharging stations across the state every, few hundred miles. And what is that going to look like? Is the power, the electrical power capacity in Junction, Texas, capable of supporting additional use? Because it's not people that are living there, it's the transient population of people going back and forth that are going to be the driver of that. And so when you start looking at electrification of transportation hubs, it will be not just the use of the people that are around and surround it. It will be the fact that a good portion of this is going to be transitory in nature. And so they're taking your electricity and leaving with it. And so, and the other thing, and I think one of the other things that has to be looked at, and I know this discussion is happening at certainly at the state level versus big DOT, is that, electricity is transitory in itself. So we don't have the capacity, if you have solar or wind, it's only as good as the wind is blowing or the sun is out. You can't, it's only flowing through the pipe, so to speak, when you have something generating it. And having the ability to store that, is not there right now. And so that surge capacity or emergency capacity has to be there in some form if it's not. And so, electricity right now, if I flip on the switch, who knows where that that actual that actual electron came from. And so your grid is constantly shifting on where it's being generated from. And so that's one of the things we have to look at too, is just the resiliency of the grid, but also the amount of generation. And what do you, if you are trying to go to a full renewable, how do you store energy for those times when it's not producing? And we're not there yet. And that's something that I know that our DOT is looking at, is if we can't store it, it's no good at night. I mean, it becomes no good. When you've got a winter storm and the lines are down, if you don't have a means of storing it, do I fire up my generator to charge my electric car? Is that how this works? So, So I hope does that answer your question?
Well, just, we get into the parts of not just the general aviation with the U-94 fuel, the Gambi 100 fuel, electrification, charging station. You're still going to have to maintain some 100 low lead for the other 35% of the fleet that still uses it. And then you got Jet A. So,
Right.
You're looking at, and then if we have these hydrogen plants coming online, you're talking 6-7 types of fuel tanks and a charging station.
Exactly. And so, one of the things that we have to look at, is the availability of the fuel. I mean, because you're going to have, well, for however much longer they fly, a classic warbird collection of aircraft that are never going to be able to run on anything but 100 low lead. And unless you whatever, but so there's going to be certain aircraft you'll never be able to convert. And so grounding them is not going to be an option. But you're going to come to a point where how many different fuels do you have to have on your what kind of your fuel farm of the future? What does that look like? And and again, it kind of goes back to the FAA is going to have to do something. We're going to have to change the rules and increase funding, that if the expectation is you carry these different types of fuels, you can't just say, well, that's a revenue producing, you can use your MPE on it, that's great. Because that's not going to work if I have to build 6 tanks of hydrogen and used cooking oil and whatever, and then I've got to put in these electric chargers, and is it going to be how far away do I have to have them, so that what is the space, how much real estate is it going to take up to do electric charging, so that it's kind of like aircraft gates, right? This gate can handle this type of airplane, well, this gate can't. And so you have to make real estate decisions based on what the use is going to be at an airport. And that's some of the questions that that need to be addressed as we're creating new standards. And so, like, for instance, in on the highway side right now, there is Tesla is going out and putting charging stations all over the place for Teslas. If you're a Tesla owner, you can go charge your car all these different places. But Tesla uses a proprietary plug, and all these other car makers use a different type of plug. So if the federal government, if federal highways is paying for these, or DOT is paying for these charging stations they want all the states to put in, it has to be this universal plug that meets most of them. So now you're going to have, this is the kind of the Betamax versus VHS discussion of, which is going to be the winning technology, and certainly nobody wants to pick, at a government, nobody wants to pick winners or losers. Well, some people do, but I don't. Nothing good happens when you try to pick winners and losers. And so now if you're going to have, compatibility with different aircraft, I mean, for all I know, for some of these folks that are doing, AAM type stuff, you may be plug and play with batteries. Now you've got batteries that you have to charge some, the future, there's so many different types of options of things, directions people want to go, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to pay for that, how we're going to design it, what the standards are going to be as far as, you must have this, this, and this, or not. And so that's a good question. And I don't know how the answer. I mean, I know that these questions are being asked. We ask them all the time. I don't know whether anybody's listening, but they certainly are being asked because, I'm looking at, from a Texas perspective, I have 182 airports in the NIPIAS system and another 90 that are not NIPIAS, but in our state system that I handle. So as the advanced air mobility companies are all, coming to the state government saying, we want you to prepare and tell us how to, do this, and we want you to help build vertiports and all these things. The answer is, well, where's the money? Who's paying for it? Or am I taking it away from the airports that are existing now? If it's a new greenfield construction, and to what design am I building it to? There's the AAM vertiport advisory circular for design, but that tells me how to build it. But now, how do I finance it? What are you going to require me to do beyond that? Because we don't know what it's going to look like. And so these are the things that I'm thinking about, for where we're going to be 6, 7, 8 years from now, trying to deal with, from my side, first thing I'm thinking about is budget, right? Because I'm a government guy. But as far as, what we are going to do, what we're going to look like, with the airport system in Texas of, that I'm supporting of, 300 NIPIAS airports, maybe, I don't know. What is the entry criteria for entering the NIPIAS as a vertiport going to be different than an airport, than a GA airport? I don't know.
Yeah, well, in the vertiport, I'm still a little confused on vertiport versus a heliport. I mean, I've had vertical lift aircraft since Sikorsky made the first helicopter. So I'm not sure why we reinvented some of the wheel on vertiport or called it a different name or something, but helicopter still goes up and down vertically.
Well, there's a whole community out there that has to have a distinction, because if we don't, they can't charge different rates.
Fair enough. Interesting on electrification and that, and I assume that the NASAO and NBAA and the 3 and 4 letter agencies all have people that talk at roundtables and meetings and conferences on this so that it's all kind of like you said, may not necessarily agree on everything, but at least one direction in with Congress and where it needs to go.
Yeah, and I think one of the agencies I left out, or agencies, one of the groups I left out was the Helicopter Association. Those guys, folks, they are taking on a lot of that vertiport battle, as far as what that's going to look like, because that is their space, and so they see it in a lot of ways as, they are still the go-to for that. But, this is where, which is fine. And that's, kind of where it should be. But then you're starting to get that crossover into, well, is it really a vertical? I mean, yeah, it may take off vertically or semi-vertically, but that doesn't mean that it's not, a business, and it falls under NBAA or somebody's private aircraft too, because, as well as I do, that as soon as, rich folks like getting the newest toy to play with. And so you're going to have a lot of that too. So there's a lot of crossover in all of the agencies as far as interest, in various parts of this, the new emerging entrance group, whether it's UAS or AAM or fuels, because we have a lot of crossover there and similar interests. Mine is not purely, but largely from an infrastructure side, and at the end of the day, a budgetary side. But, you know, I'm also getting pressured to, you know, come up with ways to help manage UAS or low altitude, which includes the AAM market at a statewide level, which is something that would be new territory for us. And anybody that knows me probably doesn't want me in charge of anything close to that. You know, I barely do this well. So, and Scott would probably differ whether I do this job well. So, but that's a joke, Scott. That's meant to be funny. See, I can't even get people to laugh here, much less at my own convention. Jeez.
You got a chuckle out of me, Dan.
Oh, thanks. That's because you're on the Aviation Advisory Committee and feel compelled.
No.
But yeah, there is a lot of crossover there. And I think we are all in agreement that, you know, and I use the word something needs to be done because nobody is quite sure, I think, what something looks like. And we all have different visions of what something looks like. And that's largely from where we, you know, view the problem. And so if you're an AAM entrant, you know, market entrant, you want unlimited access to everything. You want no regulation. You want, you know, to operate freely. If you're a town like Houston, you want to be able to tax it and tell it where it goes and where it can't go, and, you know, use zoning to do whatever you can and create your own little mini FAA. So I mean, it's kind of the opposite extremes, you know, depending on where you view your role or where you view your you know, what you want out of it. So it's going to be an interesting next few years, next 5 years. I think that it's going to come to a head as long as we can get, you know, I think the biggest thing is the certification of the aircraft. That's going to be, and somehow they're going to have to convince the public and the legislators to convince the FAA that it's safe, that it, you know, that it's okay to have these flying around people and flying with people, and new fuels aren't going to, you know, make airplanes fall out of the sky, or, you know, if you're an electric aircraft, you know, what happens if it gets wet? You know, all of these things, you know, and they may be irrational fears, but, you know, we're in the aviation community, and so we've gotten pretty comfortable with airplanes and helicopters, and you know, recognize that it's inherently, you know, it's like, you know, I have that thing somewhere of, you know, aviation is inherently like the sea, you know, it's unforgiving of mistakes, but it's still the safest mode of transportation, other than, I would say, probably even safer than walking. But convincing the public and legislators that it is, and that we know what we're doing, and that, you know, we wouldn't put you out in an airplane, we wouldn't fly on ourselves most of the time. Because when they see something happen, a big deal is made out of it. And so part of that perception is getting that, you know, it's incumbent on, you know, those people that are introducing the new technologies, whether it's fuel, whether it's electrification, whether it's the type of aircraft, whether it's to build that trust and confidence and messaging with the public to get them comfortable with it. You know, and there's been various suggestions for how that should look, you know, or plans of, you know, starting out in rural areas or things like that, you know. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ideas out there how to get it done. It's just, I guess, picking one and running with it.
So does anybody have any questions out in the field? But then I have another one, and this is kind of a subjective. We know that, you know, the FAA doesn't really have any leadership at the moment since Biden's nominee stepped out. But is NASAO is the leadership group there, along with others, kind of lobbying for a pick, to put forth to the administration. I know it's a little outside of the realm, but I mean, we're lacking leadership, which transcends down from, well, even from Secretary Buttigieg and down to, which affects money and some of those other things, and no direction, just like, we're talking with, the infrastructure and that. But as NASAO kind of probably not necessarily in the business for lobbying for that, but it would help the general aviation or aviation cause, period.
So NASAO we've never really taken a stand on a specific person. We were, though, we try to look at each candidate, who may or bring, certain strengths to the job, whether it's, having a lot of experience, in the aviation community, and what they bring from their experience. It may be outside aviation, but certainly we have been big supporters of, pick somebody, get somebody in charge of that's qualified in charge of the agency and fill this leadership void. We certainly, weren't, I'm going to say, asking for a specific person, but certainly there was hopes that, Nolan has seemed to have done, a decent job in the interim. There was I think as an organization, we had no objection to his continued, role in agency leadership. But, certainly we weren't lobbying for one individual or another. But we have voiced our concern that there pick somebody and get somebody in the seat so they can get things kind of that ship. Anybody that's ever been in an interim job, it's like, well, you can only kick stuff, kick the can down the road so many times before you go, look, I got to do, we have to make a decision here about X or Y or whatever. They've got reauthorization coming up, and certainly, it's they are, as a government agency, they respond to the will of the the legislators and the president, but being able to execute that and interpreting what the intent is, and even in some cases help shape the language so it's clear and everybody knows what they're looking for, is needed right now. And if we don't get a reauthorization done, and we go into continuing resolutions for some reason because of budget, which is not out of the realm of possibility, we all know that, there's going to be some hard decisions that have to be made about, which things are, continued and which are put on hold, and you need to have somebody in that leadership role who can do that. And so that's, a big concern of ours, particularly, given the uncertainty of the political environment right now.
Yeah, they definitely need something to sit in that seat.
My summer is busy, so don't ask me.
Even as interim?
Especially as interim.
Yeah, the interim guy doesn't really get, you're only going to be here for a little bit, and somebody else will take over. But yeah, that interim job is not that great. But so from a block grant state and NASAO, they work pretty good with the 10 that you have.
I think so. I mean, there's a wide variety. The states run the gamut, as far as kind of how we do business and, political, I'd say not ideology, but kind of how they think about government versus, what the role of government is. But I think as a rule, we pretty much agree on a lot of, in principle, on the things that we need to have the block grant state system program succeed. Certainly some states I think that this state, one of the things that's good is in this state, we as an agency are allowed to go and talk to our legislators. We have our own government relations folks within TxDOT, and the state has government relations folks that actually, stay in DC for periods of time, and we work with them so that we can have a really good relationship with our Texas legislators and even other legislators from other states. Not all the states have that. They aren't allowed to talk to their legislators. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, because the legislators like to talk to us. But at the national level, that is, state politics are a little bit different. The rules are different, but I think that as a whole, the states work pretty well together, and we're pretty unified in trying to strengthen the block grant system. At the end of the day, I'm in the project delivery. I see myself in the project delivery business. There's some of these other state agencies in other states are a little bit more regulatory. We are not. I'm not a regulatory agency. I don't want to be one. I don't want to make rules. I want to be we are a project delivery organization as a whole. And so that's what we want to be focused on. And one of the things that we want to get out of this reauthorization is to have the FAA focus more on those administrative things that take up a lot of our time, compliance, land use, things like that they don't want to do, so they push down on us. And we're like, those are kind of regulatory things. They should probably stay with, I don't know, the regulatory agency. And what we want to do, I think, as a group is let us focus on project delivery. Let us focus on building things, and you guys focus on compliance and program administration. And what we'd really like you to do is focus on keeping the NOTAM system up and the safety of the airspace and things like that, and let us build airports. But that's kind of where we are right now. But I talk to several of my peers, probably, if not weekly, at least a couple of times a month. Tony McCloskey in Pennsylvania. Bobby Walson's retiring today from North Carolina, but I used to call him. But Rachel Bingham there, folks in New Hampshire. Carol is like, I think she has the entire code of federal regulations memorized, because she will just be like, oh, that's CFR 49 section. I'm like, whoa. I didn't even answer the question. I didn't ask the question yet. But so I talk to them all the time, and we collaborate and try to get information. So it's a good working relationship, and I've learned a lot from them. So yeah, I think we're pretty close.
Excellent. We have a few minutes yet before we close and wrap this up. Is there any other questions out for Dan?
Hey, Dan, this is Jeff. Give us a little bit of feel of how NASAO works. You guys are, I know you're state aviation officials, but when you look at your committees, your committees of work,
Okay.
Being state, do you guys work primarily with GA? Do you work some, and to what degree with air service and bigger airports? Just curious.
It just depends. So if you're talking, even within the block grant states, it depends. It's wildly different. But so of the state organizations, we have the Greg Pecoraro. There's three. Well, I think there's actually going to be four soon, but 4 full-time employees in NASAO that kind of do the administration, set up the conferences and everything. And then there's the elected board of directors. Right now, so what we'll have is we'll have the Greg, CEO, president, and then we'll have the chairman, vice chair, treasurer, secretary, immediate past president. So, and then we'll have regional, we've got regional representatives. So Grayson Artles from Oklahoma is for the Southwest region. So he's my rep. And then we have the committee, the standing committees, the legislative affairs, block grant, new technology, the airport. It's a program progress. Hold on there. Planning and program. Anyway, it's basically planning, and then there's the. I know I'm forgetting one. Anyway, so those all have committee assigned or committees that were assigned by the chairman, and then, or actually, I guess I was voted on, but so the chair will, somebody will nominate, and then you'll be, voted on to a committee. It's been a while, and then the members of the committees kind of vary a little bit. So generally speaking, there's enough where people just kind of say, hey, I want to be on this committee or I want to be on that one. For the block grant, all the block grant states are on the committee. But then, for instance, I've got Jim Halley is on the design and program planning committee. Krista is, and you met Krista Giacopello, she's on the legislative affairs committee and represents TxDOT. So it just kind of depends on the charter whether it require but most of the committee chairs are state directors. And then, the membership, so there's, the membership varies because there's, different types, like I was talking about earlier, you've got the block grant states, you've got the Channeling Act states, you've got, the kind of everybody else. And then, but even then, like Texas, Texas DOT, TxDOT, we only handle general aviation airports. Once an airport goes into 139, they usually, are placed into the commercial service side and go just direct to the ADO. There are other states like Illinois, which is a block grant state, where they are a block grant state for the purposes of general aviation, but they're block grant. So they are block grant for general aviation, but they also do all of the management of federal funding and state funding for the commercial service airports as well. It all goes through them. So they play a much greater role in all of the airport system in the state of Illinois than we do. When it comes to the commercial service side. So while they're technically, the airports are still technically funded directly by the FAA, that's commercial service, but it has to go through Illinois, the state. But then they're block grant for general aviation. I believe Minnesota does something similar. It just depends. Georgia's a unique animal. They actually, their entire DOT contracts out management of the aviation system. So it's like I said, if you look at 50 states, there are 50 different ways plus the Marshall Islands and Marianas, or the Puerto Rico. There's that many. Wherever we have an airport system, it's different. So the relationships are different, and that's why I say I learned something, because we are literally all different. I mean, even like within the Southwest region, with our regional representation is kind of broken up along the FAA regions, and so even within Southwest region, Grayson's a Channeling Act state, and in Oklahoma, Louisiana's a heavy channeling state, Arkansas is not, New Mexico isn't. And we are block grant. So, I mean, everything is different, even within the region. So.
And then an off the cuff, crazy question for you. I know you came from the port arena before you found your way. into aviation. So thinking back on federal and state regulatory and business operations, and now being in the airport side for a number of years, what's crazy about airports? What do we do that's really cool that ports don't get to do or aren't good at? What are some things that you wish we could do like ports used to do?
So it's really interesting. So the way that both the state and federal governments handle the two entities are wildly different, and that's what I think is really interesting. So on the airport side of the house, for instance, federal government will do 90% of a up to 90% of a project. Let's just talk generalities. Then you have NPE for the airports, discretionary things like that. And then, whatever state funds, and, depending on which state you're in, how the state applies funds to airports. On the port side, largely at least in Texas, each port or navigation district has a set of commissioners. And again, it's kind of like airports. Every navigation district in Texas is different, all 26 of them. There's like 3 different codes that can be formed under water code or transportation code. Some of them can issue bonds, some of them can tax, some of them can't. Some of them are elected, some are appointed. But on a funding side, what's interesting is the scope of their projects are generally substantially more expensive. It can take, and so like when it comes to the dredging, the federal government, for the most part, takes responsibility for the maintenance of the federal waterway. So whether it's the intercoastal waterway or the Houston Ship Channel, they are technically responsible for the dredging and maintenance of it. But they're the Corps of Engineers. If you think the FAA is bad on timeliness and responsiveness, the Corps of Engineers is like a glacier. In Corps of Engineer years, it could take literally decades to get projects done. And so, but part of the problem is the scope of the projects and the expense of them, are into the billions of dollars, like for the Houston Ship Channel dredging, or for down by you for the Freeport Channel, I think was a $600 and something million project, and their cost shares are a lot different too. So generally speaking, for a federal dredging project where you're going deeper than your authorized depth, it could be anywhere from a 55% match to a 45% match to the federal funds. So not only is it takes longer, but the burden of the match is substantially higher for a lot of these projects. And then on the infrastructure side, like for piers and cranes, that's almost all local sponsor. Now, if the state of Texas, depending on how this budget goes, be the first time ever they've offered money on an inside the gate project, which is different for me because look, the only money they spent on ports from the state's perspective is roads up to the ports, nothing on the inside of the gate, so to speak. With me, I can't spend a dime outside the gate. So it's kind of unique and different, but yeah, it's a completely different mindset. It's of how they do business. I will say that the port community, you guys as airports work together a lot better. They all see each other as competitors, and by competition, they are vicious and mean, and will, they will do whatever they can to make deals with railroads to not serve other, whatever it takes. I'm like, guys, you are literally in the same state, okay? You all have over 100 years, 150 years established certain markets that you guys are serving. Valero is not picking up its plant out of Beaumont and moving it over to Houston. It's never going to happen. So they're competing for this like 10% market share of new stuff, and they will kill each other for it. You know, as an airport community, you guys work so much better together for the good of the system that it's amazing that it's a much different mindset. You know, it really is. I think it's so different that it's crazy. When I try to explain it to folks, they're like, oh, that sounds stupid. It's just my observation, but it's a very different mindset, very different world, very different funding. And if you think, again, besides Corps of Engineers, they have to deal with MARAD. And if you think, you know, those two are probably, as far as risk aversion, they make the FAA look like they are just on fire, like they are the most liberal organization ever, because it will take them 100 FAA years to make a decision on either one of those organizations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Today we have 3 o'clock. Is there any other questions out there for Dan? Yeah, nothing hurt, sir. We appreciate your time,
Sure.
insight to NASAO and Texas and part of the port issues. We have, well, we have a port right next door to us too, so it has its things. But if no other questions, then Jeff, I will turn it back over to you for closing remarks. I think you're muted, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm bad at doing that. Thanks, Gary. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. If you're not already registered, please consider our South Central Chapter Conference. It's May 13, 14, 15, 16 in that time frame. It's in Oklahoma City. It's going to be a great one. We've got a great couple of sessions. We're working on some good ones from a GA standpoint. NATA is going to be with us. Again, some of these collaborations I think are super important, the opportunities. So great conference coming up. If you're not registered, AAAE also has a national GA conference that'll be held. I think it's in August or maybe the September frame. So keep that your minds open to that one as well. I know that would be a great one. Gary, thanks for doing this. Appreciate you taking the lead on this. Dan, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you. And everyone, thanks. We'll be in touch soon with the date and the topic for our next one. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.